Hello, I am Dr. Adakole Ikpe. I am your facilitator for this week. In this week, we shall be looking into science in the Middle Ages of Europe and the rise of modern science. These are divided into two lessons accordingly. The Middle Age are also known as the medieval period. The period are dominated by Christian theology and characterized by initial decline of science and its rise again much later. There are two phases within this period, and they are the Dark Ages between 450 to 800 AD and the Renaissance period, which is between the 9th to the 15th century AD. At the end of this unit, you should be able to discuss vividly the state of science during the Dark Ages of Western Europe, outline the contribution of Arab scholars to science, write short notes on Robert Grosset and Roger Bacon and Leonardo da Vinci. Science in the Middle Ages of Europe. Science in the Dark Ages. This is the first part of the Middle Ages in Europe. As a result of constant invasions by barbarian tribes, that is the tribe outside the Roman Empire, civilization, which had flourished under the rule of Roman Empire, came to a standstill. Development in learning, architecture, science, and art also slowed down or stopped altogether. Life also became unsafe as a result of the many wars among the petty kingdoms within the empire. A kind of darkness covered life in Europe. For this reason, the period from about AD 450 to 800 is sometimes called the Dark Ages, in quote. You might be interested to know that this way, the period when the old kingdom of Ghana reached the peak of its civilization. Although through the Middle Ages, there was only one Christian church in Western Europe, which is the Roman Catholic Church, it became a symbol of unity, such that the united Christian world was called Christendom, in quote. During the Dark Ages, the fathers of the church showed little interest in knowledge of nature for its own sake. They believed that holding discussions on the nature and position of the earth would not help them in their hope of life to come. Therefore, the desire and the power to study nature with an open mind gradually passed away. From the Christian perspective, knowledge of nature was valued only as a means of edification or as an illustration of the passage of Scripture. People soon lost the ability to criticize and believe anything, particularly if it was in accordance with the Scriptures. Example, a dictum of Aristotle says, in quote, everything that moves is moved by something else, unquote. Thomas Aquinas, one of the fathers of the church, used the statement as evidence that God must exist since he is an unmoved mover. Aristotle's cosmology was the dominant basis of science in the Dark Ages and the scholastic period. That is the period of Arab influence. He believed that heavenly bodies influenced human destinies. However, some advances were made during this period. However, their fundamental nature really made people not to notice them. These included the inventions of the rigid horse collar and iron horse shoe. While the rigid horse collar helps to shift the weight of a load to a horse's shoulder, the horseshoe protected a horse's hoof from damage and so enabled the animal to travel further and faster than it could without them. These were important inventions, since the use of horses were their means of land transportation. What do you think were the means of land transportation in Africa as at that time? In addition, the monks in monasteries ensured that some amount of learning was kept alive. During that period, they translated ancient knowledge and works of the Egyptians, Babylonians, and Greeks into Latin. They also kept alive some knowledge of the art of agriculture, since these were practical farmers. While Europe was in the Dark Ages, Islamic learning started to flourish in the East. To the Arabs, ancient science was a precious treasure. They eagerly searched for the writings of the Greeks and translated them into their language. In this way, much of the ancient science passed into Islamic culture. Greek medicine, astronomy and astrology, mathematics, philosophical works of Plato, and particularly Aristotle's, were assimilated in Islam by the end of the 9th century. The Arabs, however, did not stop with assimilation. They criticized and tried to make their own inventions. Don't you think that that should be the attitude of Africans towards scientific achievements? As we already mentioned in the foregoing, the Arabs criticized and innovated. Their major interest was in astronomy and astrology. They constructed great astronomical observatories, which they used in checking Ptolemaic predictions. The Arabs further made many improvements in medicine. In their hands, the primitive chemistry of the Greek, known as alchemy, developed into modern chemistry. Rhazes, 865 to 925 AD, was the greatest of the Arabic alchemists. His works were based on experience and experiment. The most eminent Muslim physicist was Ibn al-Haytham, who was around 965 to 1020 AD. His chief work was done in optics and showed a great advance in experimental method. Islamic thinkers were fascinated with numbers. This fascination thus served as the motivation for the creation of algebra, from the Arabic word al-jabr, and the study of algebraic functions. They also borrowed the idea of zero from the Hindu and mathematicians and invented the Arabic numerals. Is it not interesting? Do you know what the Arabic numerals are? You might know about many, not have known who invented them and how they were invented. The Arabic numerals are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Are you surprised? You would know how the importance of this invention. Just imagine how our everyday would have been like without these numerals. We would not be able to do formal mathematics. Various businesses would not have been able to keep records, and governments would have found it difficult to take census and so on and so forth. Towards the end of the medieval period, it was widely recognized that East held the secret of ancient wisdom in learning and science. First, the Europeans, that is the West, developed interest in Arabic language and commenced translation of books from Arabic to Latin. You can observe the influence of Arabic learning of this period from several basic scientific firms that have their origins in Arabic or Persian language. Examples include the following: pharmaceutical firms like alcohol, camphor, and syrup. These are Persian origin. Technical and astronomical things like zenith, azimuth, azure, etc. These are of Arabic origin. Mathematical terms like zero, cipher, sine, root, algebra, algorithm, etc. Music terms like flute, guitar, rebec, etc. Other words of Arabic origin include almanac, mattress, tick, tartan, astronomy, etc. However, the Arabic or Muslim science was very speculative, making little or no experiments. It was not empirical. By the close of 11th century, the decline of Arabic learning had set in, and from then, science was chiefly a European activity. Now, science in the Renaissance period. This period is the second half of the Middle Ages of Western Europe, and it started from the 9th to the 15th century. During this period, men began to be dissatisfied with a way of life, which made progress very slow. People felt that changes in ideas, in beliefs, and in ways of thought were necessary. The ancient Greeks and the people of other ancient civilizations had written many books on mathematics, astronomy, geography, etc. And learned men of this period began to study these ancient writings. This interesting desire for knowledge was satisfied by translation of Greek books into Latin. This was done in two ways. Firstly, by retranslation from the Arabic, and later by direct translation from the Greek. The learned men of this period saw that the ancient scholars had a lot to offer them. But they were not satisfied to learn simply what those before them had written or thought. They tried to find out new things for themselves. This should exactly be the attitude of Africans and Nigerians in particular towards scientific development. Don't you think so? You would observe that this attitude of Renaissance men was different from that of men of the Dark Ages. Men of the Dark Ages were often satisfied with whatever they learned without any form of questioning. This spirit of questioning old beliefs and forming new opinions generally came to be described as the Renaissance, which means rebirth or revival of learning. The revival was started in Italy by three famous scholars: Dante, 1265 to 1321 AD, Petrarch, 1304 to 1374 AD, and Boccaccio, 1313 to 1321 AD. These artists tried to show how superior their learning, art, and culture of the ancient Greeks were, and this led to a revival of interest in the Greek language. In the field of science, were two very influential theologians and philosophers: Albert the Great, 1193 to 1280 AD, a Bavarian Dominican priest, and Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274 AD, an Italian monk. Both of them taught at the University of Paris, They were the first to accept the idea of a distinction between knowledge of nature and revealed knowledge. But they also pointed out that God was the author of both. The rationalistic approach, separating large segments of human knowledge from theology, prepared the way for a relatively independent development of science. Some scientists of this period, with experimental and practical bent of mind, include the following. Robert Grosseteste, 1175 to 1253 AD. He was an English philosopher of science. He determined the main direction of the physical science in the 13th and 14th centuries. He had knowledge of the working of mirrors and of the nature of lenses. Roger Bacon, 1214 to 1294 AD. He was an English Franciscan monk. He was the first man in Europe during the Renaissance period, approached in scientific spirit the great Arabians who preceded him. This was because of his clear understanding that experimental methods alone give certainty in science. This was a revolutionary change in mental attitude. He read all the authors he could reach. This included those of the Arabic and Greek authors. Instead of accepting the facts and inferences of natural knowledge from the scriptures and the fathers, the Arabians or Aristotle, he told the world that the only way to verify their statement was to observe and experiment. But in spite of his writing, he did not appear to have done much experimenting himself, except in optics. In addition, for his entire comparatively advanced outlook, he accepted most of the medieval attitude of mind. This was with regards to the fact that the end of science and philosophy was to explain and adorn their queen, that is theology. Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519. He was an Italian, and he also stands as the incarnation of the true spirit of scientific thought and Renaissance. He was a painter, a sculptor, an engineer, an architect, a physicist, a biologist, and a philosopher. He was indeed supreme in each role. To him, observation of nature and experimentation were the only true methods of science. He also believed that knowledge of the ancient writers could be useful as a starting point, but could never be conclusive. He opined that mathematics, arithmetic, and geometry gave knowledge that was certain within their domain, and therefore had something to do with reasoning. But true science, he said, began with observation to obtain certainty of knowledge. According to him again, those sciences which do not begin with experiments, the mother of all certainties, and which do not end with one clear experiment, are vain and full of errors. In quote. Science to him gave certainty and power. Leonardo might have been great, but it is to be noted that he did not solely originate the scientific spirit he displayed. Alberti, 1404 to 1472, had studied mathematics and did physical experiments before him. While he was helped in his anatomical researches by Antonio della Torre, Amerigo Vespucci gave him a book of geometry. What do you think we can learn from the men of Renaissance? If your answer includes the following, then you are on the right track. 1. They founded modern science. They emphasized observation, hypnotizing, and experimentation, which are the core elements of the scientific method. 2. In spite of the above statement, science at the Renaissance period was still a branch of philosophy. This is because Renaissance men were still philosophers in spite of their advanced scientific outlook. 3. Africans, especially Nigerians of all walks of life, should cultivate the habit of using the scientific method of reasoning. It was the emergence of this method and its use that led to the advancement of countries of Western Europe and other advanced countries. Summary. In this unit, we have discussed how Western science, which originated in the ancient times, progressed through the Dark Ages and the Renaissance period. As you are now aware, the Dark Ages and the Renaissance period constitute the two parts of the time called Middle Ages of Europe. Within this period, Western science was still trying not only to find its feet, but also to free itself from the clutches of philosophy and religion. The main points in this lesson include the Middle Ages of Western Europe comprises two phases, which are the Dark Ages between 450 to 800 AD and the Renaissance period between the 9th to the 15th century AD. In the Dark Ages, knowledge of nature was valued only as a means of edification or as an illustration of the passage of Scripture. In that period also, people lost the ability to criticize and believed anything that was in accordance with the Scriptures. Thus, science and learning declined rapidly. In that same period, the monks in the monasteries translated ancient works into Latin and thus kept alive some amount of learning. While Europe was in the Dark Ages, Islamic learning started to flourish. Islamic scholars translated Greek writings into their language because they treasured ancient science. In this way, ancient science passed into Islamic culture. The Arabs did not stop with assimilation. They also criticized and innovated. In their hands, the primitive chemistry of the Greeks, known as alchemy, developed into modern chemistry. Islamic thinkers also create the science of algebra and the study of algebraic functions. They also borrowed the ideas of zero from the Hindu mathematicians and invented the Arabic numerals. Many scientific terms such as alcohol, syrup, zenith, algebra, zero, sine, etc. are legacies which Arabic science left to mankind. The Renaissance period was characterized by an increasing desire for knowledge such as critical power resurfaced. The Renaissance in science was started by two theologians, Albert the Great, 1193 to 1280 AD, and Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274 AD. They were the first to accept the idea of a distinction between knowledge of nature and revealed knowledge. They also pointed out that God was the author of both. This attitude of theirs prepared the way for a relatively independent development of science. Some scientists of this period also emphasized the method of observation and experimentation, where Robert Grotestes, 1175 to 1253 AD, Roger Bacon, 1214 to 1294 AD, and Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519 AD.